Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. So I guess I'll begin. So I'm Shubh. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ocular Diagnoses. And at Ocular, we're trying to change the way we diagnose ADHD, making diagnosis accessible, accurate, and automated. So the biggest problem, especially if you look at it from a development economic perspective, is that equitable access to medical diagnosis is integral to achieve SDG goals in developing nations, where poverty and a lack of medical infrastructure create stark inequalities in the accessibility of diagnosis and treatment. Yet, ADHD and similar neurobehavioral disorders remain widely underdiagnosed, especially in the developing world, as a result of both societal stigmas as well as deficient medical practices. The prevalence rate in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America is roughly equal to that in the United States and in Europe. Yet, the actual diagnosis rate in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America is much lower. ADHD is egregiously neglected and extremely underdiagnosed in the developing world. So this really boils down to three key problems. First, diagnosis is inefficient. It takes more than 6 months with wait times of 1 to 2 years. Second, and most importantly, it's extremely expensive. And basically, since it costs more than $2,000, it renders individuals who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum unable to be diagnosed with ADHD. And third, and most importantly, it's inaccurate. For someone to be diagnosed, their teacher, or their parent has to think they have ADHD. They go to doctor. Doctor has a piece of paper with a bunch of self-reported symptoms. Based on the total number of check boxes on a piece of paper, you either do or don't have ADHD. And as a result of that, the diagnosis is extremely inaccurate, with 20% misdiagnosis rate, and around 1 million children each year are misdiagnosed. So the way we solve this at Ocular is that we use pupil dynamics as a novel and objective biomarker for attentional disorder. It's basically some research that's been verified by global research and institutions as a proper metric of ADHD. And we basically rely on this objective metric as opposed to qualitative observations to diagnose ADHD. So it's really simple the way we work. First, a patient completes a visuospatial memory diagnostic application, which basically tracks their eye movement and their pupil dilation. Then we capture this in real time using computer webcams. So it's basically accessible, whether it's on a mobile camera or a computer camera. Third, we basically use a deep learning front end to capture the pupil and process it in our machine learning algorithm. And then we output a diagnosis as well as medical advice in case someone wants to corroborate. So this is a quick condensed diagnostic application. In reality, it's around 20 to 25 minutes. But basically, I'll just fast forward here. We can use this on any webcam. And then you can see over here, our deep learning on the front end is trying to extract the pupil of this test subject. And once it does so, it gives a visuospatial memory task. So this is just an abbreviated version. And then this would continue. And then once that is done, basically output a diagnosis. So no ADHD, 5.2% risk, as well as biometrics. So basically looking at the data and using that for a clinician. So our product is really relevant for SDG, especially 3. In developing nations, the inaccessibility of diagnosis coupled with traditional stigma surrounding mental disorders precludes proper diagnosis and treatment for youth. So if you just think about it from an economic policy perspective, if we're trying to have education policy, there's no effect if those children are not being diagnosed with ADHD and they're suffering economically, socially, and academically. We go to the roots of this issue and diagnose ADHD at its earliest stages, so education policy can be effective. And our team is diverse. We're basically all 16 or 17 years old, meaning we understand ADHD. We have friends who have ADHD. We have family who have ADHD, and we understand this problem. We're young, ambitious, hardworking, and we're serial entrepreneurs. And in terms of traction so far, we've built our product, we're patented, and right now we're getting IRB approval and doing clinical testing in local hospitals and pushing this into non-local applications. So you can visit us at oculardiagnoses.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's actually a super interesting solution, I would say. And any question from the judges and the experts, I'll leave it for them. Really happy to say you patent your solution as well. So please, John.
Yes. This screen is frozen here. I can't see. It's still on the presentation. Okay. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love the passion. Number one. Okay, you got great passion behind you, and you're young and intuitive, and it's fantastic. The model itself that you have, so is the business model in a way that this is for clinics, hospitals, could go to GPs? Who's actually your first set of customer here? Who's the first person you go to? the first business?
Yeah, so we're partnering with local hospitals and institutions. So
Okay.
we've actually partnered with Mount Sinai, Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai.
Yes.
So basically doing clinical testing through them. And in terms of actual revenue, it's basically going to be partnering with local hospitals and institutions at first and expanding that network and basically selling this to these hospitals. At the same time, we're also looking at partnering with insurance companies, because if you just think about it, for an insurance company, if
Yes.
the diagnosis of ADHD, the cost gets reduced so much, it's automated, doctors not even necessary, it reduces their costs, and they also have pathways into the med tech industry. So we're also looking to partner with them at the same time.
And are you partnering with any psychological institutes or anything on this in the ADHD?
So we have a really renowned deep learning researcher at Mount Sinai who is working with us and advising us. And then also they have an ADHD department who's also helped us in terms of just giving feedback and just advisement.
And this application, or the diagnosis itself, the data and everything else when you go through the process, this is online, correct? Is it online on an application, or is it a thin client that goes onto your phone? What is the format?
So right now what we're basically going to be doing is on the local application that we built that was in the video, that is basically just local to our computer. But basically we're going to be selling the IP, the software as an SAMS software as a medical service to local institutions, hospitals, basically have that software running on their desktop or laptop or computer.
And you have this testing right now in some hospitals at the moment, or you're trialing it?
We're actually really close to starting clinical trials, the second round of clinical trials. Before, we've already tested on 50 patients, and now we're going to do like a full round of clinical trials.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Yuvan.
Yeah,
maybe Tanya. Yeah.
Shubh, that's a really lovely presentation. As John, I like the vision and the energy. One question related to your business model. Do you think that parents will be interested to pay and to measure the status of their kids and to get some result proper there? Because if that's possible, maybe your scalability of the business model could be even greater.
Of course. So we've actually talked to to parents of children who have ADHD. And basically the overwhelming consensus that we really gained from that, the data that we understood, is that parents are frustrated because for someone to be diagnosed, it's an extremely lengthy process. And the parent doesn't even know for sure, does their kid actually have ADHD or do they not? So if they're receiving improper treatment, they're going to have side effects. If they're not receiving the treatment, they're not going to be able to succeed. So on the parent side, it's really just an overwhelming consensus that something like this is needed. And in terms of cost, the parents themselves wouldn't be bearing the cost. It's basically automating the whole diagnostic process. So changing the way we diagnose ADHD. So basically removing the doctor or just having them as this kind of a medical advisement. So basically lowering the cost for the hospitals as well as lowering the cost for the patients.
Okay. And who are your main competitors right now?
There's no one diagnosing ADHD out there except for doctors.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Sue. Thank you very much again for the presentation. So I have two questions. One relates to a statement that you made that in fact one of the major problems is that there is social stigma attached in many geographies and in many cultures to having ADHD. So have you thought about partnering with other organizations so that there's awareness around what this means and how this is not the fault of anyone, et cetera, because otherwise I would imagine that no one's going to want to have their children diagnosed as having ADHD because of the social stigma attached to that. So that's my first question, then I'll move on to the second.
Of course. So there's actually this nonprofit that I'm relatively close to. It's called Vision for and From Eyes. I'm forgetting the exact name, but basically what they do is that they focus on kind of awareness in terms of just ADHD as well as just traditional neurobehavioral disorders. And they work for large population. So we haven't really made a lot of headway in terms of trying to reduce that stigma because it's a huge issue. It's basically just a societal issue that goes back a long way. but we are working with them in terms of seeing if there's any way, just in terms of making marketing more positive towards these populations, or just making it so that more people can be diagnosed with ADHD. But I guess in addition to that, it's not just societal stigma, it's also just people don't know about ADHD in the developing world, as well as the cost of actually diagnosing ADHD. You have very few, people like neurologists in sub-Saharan Africa who have experience dealing with ADHD. So that's why we basically replace the need to have those doctors and just use an automated diagnostic application.
Thank you. My second question is really a follow-on from Yovan's, which is the scalability of what you do. Selling into hospitals and selling into healthcare institutions generally, I mean, the sales cycles are really long. They're very complex. You have to go through procurement processes that may or may not result in something in a purchase order for what you're offering, essentially. To what degree have you considered even developing your technology so it's something that people can do in their homes using their webcams? Is that something that your technology could address with a sufficiently good resolution within a webcam?
Yeah, so that last thing you mentioned is really like the biggest hurdling block. So our objective is in terms of increasing the accuracy and specificity of applications so that we can use it on any local application, on any local webcam. But the problem is that just it's really difficult in terms of giving a precise diagnosis on a mobile application without a presence of a doctor. And then also just the webcam, the quality of a camera on a flip phone or a mobile phone that has a camera may not be up to par in terms of being able to segment that pupil, as well as looking at its minute size changes over time. But in terms of that, we're working to make our algorithm, our deep learning algorithm using Huff transform methods, much more accurate in terms of being able to extract that pupil. So that's a vision. But right now, for the short term, we've basically talked with a couple of people in the medtech industry who run companies there. And they basically advise us in terms of FDA regulatory approval, and then also how to make headway into the medtech, into the healthcare industry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shubha. I think we have Josh, final question. Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, firstly, thank you very much for your presentation. I just like what John said, that I really love your passion and the seriousness. And then I just quickly thinking about what I did when I was 16 and 17. And so I was really, really inspired by your passion. So thank you very much. So some of the questions are actually already covered by other judges. So I just wanted to clarify my curiosity here. So basically you started with the issues about the inequality in treatment in the developing countries. But also you mentioned about some problems in this treatment, like an inefficiency, like high price, and also inaccuracy. But basically, those challenges are still, also, applicable in the hospital in developed countries, right? So you don't necessarily really have, targeting to the hospital in developing country. Rather, you firstly target to the any hospital in any world, and then you would like to expand your vision to the developing country. Am I correctly understanding your vision?
Yeah. So the focus right now is in terms of, we're based out of New York City, so local hospitals over here. But the thing is that a big reason why the diagnosis is so expensive is that trained neurologists with PhDs and a lot of research and who are really good costs a ton of money. And in addition to that, for someone to be diagnosed from that neurologist, it takes so many hours, it takes so many months, so many recurring visits. So that's why those bills keep on racking up. And that's why it's expensive for hospitals to even diagnose ADHD. And it's expensive for patients to even come and get diagnosed with ADHD. So basically by creating an automated process in which we're basically just having a royalty fee, it basically just makes the diagnosis itself much, much cheaper on the ends of both the hospitals as well as the consumers. So I actually just, in my appendix, I had a slide basically talks about how each year $3.5 billion are spent by households on ADHD diagnosis, and $1.2 billion are paid by hospitals for the long hours of testing. So we decrease these costs and increase the accuracy with AI.